Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to Lotus Light Teachings. Today, we're diving into a topic that touches all of us at some point in life: how to find true happiness and peace while being alone. Together, we'll explore 10 powerful Buddhist lessons that will transform the way you view solitude, relationships, and self-love. So, grab a cup of tea, find a cozy spot, and let's embark on this inspiring journey of self-discovery and growth. Have you ever sat in silence, feeling the weight of loneliness, wondering if this quiet void could ever be something more? What if I told you that solitude isn't an emptiness to fear, but a vast and beautiful space? A canvas where you can paint your truest self. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine. A traveler stands at the edge of a serene forest. The morning mist rolls in like a soft blanket, and the only sound is the rhythm of their breath mingling with the whisper of the trees. At first, they feel uneasy. After all, they've always had companions on their journey. But as the stillness deepens, they begin to notice something extraordinary. The colors of the forest seem brighter, the air feels fresher, and a quiet strength awakens within. In today's fast-paced, hyper-connected world, being alone is often seen as a void to escape from. Social media fills our hours. External validation becomes a craving, and we stretch ourselves thin trying to meet everyone's expectations. But what if the most transformative relationship you could ever cultivate is the one you have with yourself? Buddhism teaches us that true happiness doesn't come from the noise outside. It blossoms in the silence within. When you sit with yourself, when you let go of toxic ties and embrace the power of solitude, something magical happens. You begin to heal, grow, and uncover parts of yourself that were waiting to be seen. Solitude isn't about isolation. It's about freedom. Together, in this video, we'll uncover 10 profound Buddhist lessons that will guide you through the art of letting go, embracing solitude, and thriving in your own company. These teachings are more than philosophical. They are deeply practical, rooted in real life. Along the way, I'll share stories of transformation, practical exercises, and timeless wisdom to help you turn loneliness into peace and stillness into strength. So, let's take that first step. Let's walk this path of self-discovery, not as strangers, but as companions exploring the infinite potential within ourselves. 1. Let go of toxic relationships. In the stillness of a quiet night, have you ever felt a weight pressing down on your heart? The kind of weight that doesn't come from exhaustion but from something deeper. A connection that no longer serves you, yet you struggle to release it? This is the burden of toxic relationships, and it is a struggle many of us know all too well. Let me tell you a story. There was a young woman named Maya, whose life seemed full of love and connection. She had a close friend who had been with her since childhood. They shared memories of laughter and tears, but as time went on, Maya began to notice something unsettling. Every conversation with her friend left her feeling drained. Every interaction filled with subtle criticisms and unmet expectations. She clung to the relationship, telling herself, "We've been through so much together. I owe her my loyalty." But deep down, Maya knew the truth. This friendship was no longer a source of joy or support. It had become a chain holding her back. One day, Maya came across a Buddhist teaching that struck her like lightning. The Buddha once said, "Attachment leads to suffering." It wasn't the relationship itself that was causing her pain, but her clinging to the idea of what it had been. Relationships, like all things in life, are impermanent. They grow, they change, and sometimes they must come to an end. Maya began to reflect deeply. She asked herself, what am I afraid of losing? Why do I feel guilty for wanting peace? As she sat in stillness, the answers revealed themselves. Her fear wasn't of losing her friend, but of losing the identity tied to that friendship, the person she thought she was because of it. And the guilt? It was rooted in societal expectations, the unspoken belief that letting go is an act of cruelty rather than one of self-preservation. In Buddhist philosophy, the story of the mustard seed offers profound wisdom here. A grieving mother once came to the Buddha, carrying the lifeless body of her child. She begged him to bring the child back to life. The Buddha gently told her to find a mustard seed from a home where no one had ever experienced death or loss. The mother searched tirelessly but could find no such home. Eventually, she returned to the Buddha, understanding that suffering is universal, and clinging to the past only prolongs the pain. Maya decided to let go. It wasn't an easy decision, nor was it one without tears, but it was a step toward freedom. She began by setting small boundaries, choosing not to engage in conversations that drained her, politely declining invitations that felt obligatory. Over time, she distanced herself with grace and compassion, both for her friend and herself. In that space, something remarkable happened. Maya found clarity, strength, and the kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. Letting go of toxic relationships isn't about rejecting others. It's about embracing yourself. When we release what no longer serves us, we make room for growth, for joy, for connections that uplift rather than weigh us down. But how do we begin this process, especially when guilt and fear threaten to pull us back? Start with reflection. Sit quietly and ask yourself, does this relationship bring me peace or pain? Does it support my growth or hinder it? Write down your thoughts if it helps, creating a clear picture of what you're holding on to and why. Then practice compassion, not just for others but for yourself. It's not cruel to walk away from negativity. It's an act of self-love. Remember, you can release someone with kindness. Offer gratitude for the lessons they've brought into your life, even if those lessons came through pain. Finally, take action in small steps. Create boundaries, reduce contact, or, if necessary, have an honest conversation. You may find that the other person also feels the strain and is ready to let go. If not, trust that your choice to step away is valid. In modern psychology, this process aligns with the concept of emotional detachment, which doesn't mean cutting off all feelings, but creating a healthy distance from toxic dynamics. By detaching, you reclaim your energy and redirect it toward relationships and activities that nourish you. Letting go is not a single act but a practice, a continual reminder that your peace is worth more than the fear of change. As the Buddha taught, you can only lose what you cling to. Imagine your heart as a lotus flower, rooted in muddy waters yet untouched by their murk. By releasing the mud of toxic relationships, you allow your inner lotus to bloom, radiant and free. As you reflect on Maya's story and these teachings, take a moment to ask yourself, what am I holding on to that no longer serves me? And more importantly, what could I gain by letting it go? Let the answers guide you, not as commands but as whispers of your soul's deepest truth. 2. Embrace solitude as freedom. Have you ever stood at the edge of the ocean at dawn, where the world seems to hold its breath, and felt an inexplicable calm settle over you? That moment, when you are entirely alone but at peace, is the essence of solitude. It is not an emptiness, but a fullness, a chance to rediscover the self that often gets lost in the noise of the world. There was once a traveler who ventured deep into the mountains, seeking an answer to a question that had haunted him for years. What does it mean to be truly free? He had spent much of his life surrounded by people, friends, family, co-workers, yet he often felt an ache of disconnection, as though he were a stranger even to himself. One day, in the quiet of the forest, he stopped walking, sat on a rock, and let the stillness envelop him. At first, his thoughts raced, each one louder than the last, but gradually they began to settle, like ripples fading from the surface of a lake. In that silence, he began to hear something he hadn't heard in years. His own voice, gentle but clear, whispering truths he had long ignored. Buddhist philosophy teaches us that solitude is not a state of loneliness, but a sanctuary where clarity and self-discovery thrive. In the modern world, where our senses are constantly bombarded with notifications, deadlines, and expectations, solitude can feel like an unfamiliar and even uncomfortable place. Yet, it is precisely in this discomfort that growth begins. To truly understand the power of solitude, we must first confront our fear of it. Why does silence make us uneasy? Why do we rush to fill the quiet with distractions? These questions lead us back to a fundamental teaching of the Buddha. Dukkha, or suffering, arises from our attachments to people, to outcomes, to the idea of being constantly connected. Solitude, then, becomes a mirror, reflecting back the parts of ourselves we often try to escape. It forces us to confront not only our joys but also our fears, our regrets, and our longings. And yet, in that confrontation lies liberation. Think about how often we avoid being alone with our thoughts. We turn to our phones, our televisions, even the background hum of music, as if the silence might reveal something we're not ready to face. But consider this: what if that silence holds not a threat, but a gift? What if, in the stillness, you could rediscover who you truly are, beneath the layers of expectation and distraction? Modern movements like digital detox retreats echo this ancient wisdom. People unplug from technology and spend time in nature, journaling, meditating, or simply being. Initially, participants often describe feelings of anxiety or restlessness, but as the days pass, they report a profound sense of peace, a reconnection with themselves and the world around them. These experiences highlight a universal truth. Solitude is a skill, one that requires practice, but the rewards are immeasurable. Let me share another story. In a small village, there lived a potter named Arun. Arun spent most of his days shaping clay on his wheel, his hands moving with practiced precision. One day, after finishing a batch of pots for the market, he decided to take a day for himself. He walked into the nearby forest, a place he hadn't visited since childhood. As he sat beneath an old banyan tree, the quiet began to stir something within him. He noticed the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the steady rhythm of his own breath. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of connection, not to the people around him, but to life itself. When Arun returned to his pottery wheel the next day, he found that his hands moved with a new creativity, shaping forms he had never imagined before. Arun's experience speaks to the transformative power of solitude. When we step away from the world, even briefly, we return with a clearer mind and a fuller heart. Solitude allows us to hear the whispers of our intuition, to uncover talents and passions that might have been buried under the demands of daily life. But how do we embrace solitude in a world that constantly pulls us outward? Start small. Dedicate just 5 or 10 minutes a day to sitting quietly with yourself. Leave your phone in another room. Close your eyes and focus on your breath, noticing how it feels as it moves in and out of your body. At first, your mind may resist, filling the space with thoughts about your to-do list or unresolved conflicts. Be patient. Let the thoughts come and go, like clouds drifting across the sky. With time, the quiet will become less intimidating and more inviting. Once you've grown comfortable with these moments of stillness, consider expanding your practice. Spend an afternoon without technology, or take a solo walk in nature. Bring a journal with you and write down whatever comes to mind, your feelings, your reflections, even the things you notice around you. These small acts of solitude are like planting seeds. With care and consistency, they will grow into a garden of inner peace and self-awareness. In Buddhist teachings, the concept of noble silence is a cornerstone of mindfulness practice. It's not just the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. When we embrace noble silence, we create space for wisdom to arise. We begin to see the world and ourselves with greater clarity. As the Buddha said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." Solitude is the fertile ground where these thoughts take root, where you can choose which ones to nurture and which to release. As you continue this journey, remember that solitude is not about withdrawing from the world entirely. It is about learning to stand on your own, to find strength and joy in your own company, so that when you do return to the world, you bring with you a deeper sense of purpose and peace. Ask yourself, when was the last time I truly sat with myself? What might I discover if I gave myself the gift of quiet? These questions are not meant to be answered quickly, but to linger, to guide you as you explore the sanctuary of solitude. In the end, solitude is not a place we retreat to out of fear or sadness. It is a space we enter with courage and curiosity, knowing that within it lies the freedom to grow, to heal, and to become. Like the traveler in the mountains or Arun beneath the banyan tree, we all have the capacity to find our own sanctuary, to listen to the voice within, and to emerge stronger, wiser, and more at peace. Solitude is not a void. It is a gift waiting to be unwrapped. Will you embrace it? 3. Boundaries reflect self-respect. There is a gentle power in knowing where you end and others begin. A quiet strength in drawing the lines that protect your peace. Yet, how often do we find ourselves saying yes, when every fiber of our being cries no? How often do we offer parts of ourselves we don't have to give, simply to avoid discomfort or please others? There was once a man named Ravi, a kind and hardworking soul who prided himself on being dependable. Ravi's co-workers admired his willingness to take on extra tasks, and his family often turned to him for support, no matter the hour. But beneath his accommodating smile lay a growing exhaustion. Each yes he gave to others came at the cost of his own energy, his own dreams. One evening, as he sat at his desk long past midnight, finishing a project he didn't have the capacity to handle, Ravi felt a pang of realization. He wasn't living his life, he was merely surviving it, for others. In the teachings of the Buddha, the practice of right action and right speech, two pillars of the Noble Eightfold Path, offers wisdom for moments like these. These principles remind us to act and speak in ways that align with our well-being and the well-being of others. Boundaries, in this sense, are not acts of rejection but of love. They honor our interconnectedness by ensuring that what we give comes from a place of sincerity, not resentment or depletion. Ravi's journey toward setting boundaries began with a simple yet profound question. What am I giving to others that I am not giving to myself? As he reflected, he realized he had neglected his own needs for rest, creativity, and joy. The next day, when a coworker asked him to take on yet another task, Ravi hesitated. His instinct was to say yes, but this time, he paused and gently replied, "I'd love to help, but I'm at my limit right now." It was a small act, but for Ravi, it felt monumental, a moment of reclaiming himself. Setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable, especially when we fear disappointing others. But as the Buddha taught, suffering often arises from attachment to approval, to avoiding conflict, to the idea that we must always be everything to everyone. True peace comes when we release these attachments and honor the truth of our limits. Imagine a garden, vibrant and lush, surrounded by a simple wooden fence. The fence doesn't block the sunlight or keep people out. It merely protects the garden's growth, ensuring that the plants within can thrive. Without that boundary, wandering feet might trample the tender shoots, and the garden's beauty would fade. You too are like that garden. Your boundaries are not walls of isolation. They are acts of self-respect that safeguard your energy and allow you to flourish. In Ravi's case, setting boundaries wasn't just about saying no. It was about redefining how he interacted with the world. He began small, starting with polite yet firm phrases, "I'd love to help, but I can't right now," or "I need to take care of something for myself first." Over time, these boundaries became second nature, and something remarkable happened. The people around him began to respect his limits. They saw that Ravi's no wasn't an act of selfishness but of balance. This balance aligns beautifully with Buddhist teachings. When we practice right action, we ensure that our choices reflect kindness, integrity, and respect, both for ourselves and others. Similarly, right speech encourages us to communicate with honesty and compassion, which includes expressing our needs and limits. By setting boundaries, we embody these principles, creating harmony within ourselves and our relationships. But what happens when others resist our boundaries? This too is part of the journey. When Ravi's sister asked him to rearrange his plans to accommodate her, he calmly explained, "I wish I could, but I've already made commitments to myself this weekend." She pushed back, accusing him of being distant. Ravi felt a pang of guilt but reminded himself of a truth he had come to embrace. Choosing himself didn't mean he loved her any less. Over time, his family began to understand and even admire his newfound clarity. For those beginning this practice, here are some gentle yet effective ways to start. Pause before responding. When someone asks for your time or energy, take a moment before replying. This pause allows you to assess whether you truly have the capacity to say yes. Use clear language. Avoid vague responses like, "I'll see what I can do." Instead, be honest. "I can't commit to that right now, but thank you for thinking of me." Acknowledge emotions. If you fear hurting someone's feelings, express empathy while maintaining your boundary. I know this might be disappointing, but I need to prioritize something else. Practice self-compassion. Setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable at first. Remind yourself that it's okay to prioritize your well-being. You are not selfish for doing so, you are whole. As you practice, reflect on the words of the Buddha. You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Boundaries are one of the purest expressions of this truth. They say, I honor myself enough to protect my peace, and I honor you enough to give you my best when I can. Think of your life as a canvas. Without boundaries, the colors might bleed together, creating chaos. But with thoughtful lines, each stroke finds its place, forming a masterpiece that reflects your true self. Take a moment now to ask yourself, where in my life do I need to draw a line? Let the answer guide you, not with urgency, but with the quiet assurance that your peace is worth protecting. For inner peace begins within. There was a time when Asha's life felt like it was spinning out of control. She had always been someone who thrived on achievements, pushing herself to excel in her career, to be the perfect partner, the supportive friend. But one day, everything came crashing down. A major project at work failed, her relationship ended, and she found herself overwhelmed by the sheer weight of it all. Asha sat in her small apartment, the silence around her broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, and for the first time, she realized how much noise she carried within. It was then that a close friend suggested mindfulness, a concept that, at the time, felt abstract and distant to her. Sit with your thoughts, her friend had said. Watch them, don't fight them. Asha scoffed at first. How could sitting quietly solve anything? But with nothing left to lose, she gave it a try. She lit a small candle, closed her eyes, and focused on her breath. At first, her mind raced with worries and regrets. But slowly, as she kept returning to her breath, the noise began to fade. In its place, there was stillness, a fragile, fleeting calm. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was a beginning. Buddhism teaches that the mind is the source of both suffering and liberation. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, mind is the forerunner of all things. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. Inner peace doesn't arise from controlling external circumstances. It blooms when we cultivate harmony within ourselves. The practice of mindfulness, of observing thoughts without judgment, embodies the concept of the middle way. Neither indulging in desires nor suppressing them, the middle way invites balance, a state where we neither cling to the highs nor sink into the lows. For Asha, this balance was transformative. She began integrating mindfulness into her daily life, not just in meditation but in the simplest of acts, mindful walking, where she noticed the texture of the ground beneath her feet, or mindful eating, savoring the flavors and textures of each bite. These moments, though small, anchored her in the present, pulling her out of the spiral of anxiety and regret. You too can find peace in the ordinary. Begin by setting aside 5 minutes each day to focus on your breath. When your mind wanders, as it inevitably will, gently bring it back, like a shepherd guiding a stray lamb. Over time, expand this practice. Take a walk and feel the breeze against your skin. Eat a meal slowly, noticing its colors, smells, and tastes. These simple acts are not trivial. They are profound steps toward rediscovering the stillness within. But mindfulness is not the absence of struggle. It is the courage to face our pain with compassion. Asha discovered this when she began journaling as part of her mindfulness practice. She wrote about her fears, her failures, her shame, and in doing so, she began to see them not as enemies but as teachers. Each regret, each moment of pain, held a lesson. To let go, to forgive, to grow. Inner peace is not a destination. It is a journey. It requires patience, practice, and, above all, self-compassion. As you navigate this path, remember the Buddha's teaching, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Let these words guide you, not as a command but as an invitation. What might you discover if you turned inward? What truths, what strengths, lie waiting in the quiet chambers of your heart? 5. Self-love is the foundation of all love. There was once a bandit named Angulimala, a man feared for his ruthlessness. His name, which means garland of fingers, came from the gruesome necklace he wore, made of the severed fingers of his victims. Yet, even a man like Angulimala was not beyond redemption. When he encountered the Buddha, something within him shifted. The Buddha's calm presence, his unwavering compassion, pierced through the darkness of Angulimala's heart. "I see you," the Buddha said, "not for what you've done, but for who you can become." Moved by these words, Angulimala renounced his violent ways and became a monk, dedicating his life to helping others. But his transformation was not easy. The weight of his past haunted him, and forgiveness felt impossible. It was only when he began to practice self-compassion, learning to see himself as worthy of love despite his flaws, that true healing began. Self-love, as Angulimala's story shows, is not about ignoring our faults or indulging our egos. It is about embracing our humanity, the messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of who we are. Buddhism teaches that all beings possess the seed of enlightenment, the potential for boundless love and wisdom. To nurture that seed, we must first learn to love ourselves. Psychologists echo this wisdom, emphasizing that self-compassion rewires the brain for resilience. When we treat ourselves with kindness, we activate the brain's soothing system, reducing stress and increasing emotional strength. This isn't indulgence. It's a necessary foundation for growth and connection. Consider this: how can you pour from an empty cup? How can you offer genuine love to others if you neglect yourself? Self-love is not selfish. It is the soil from which all other love grows. If you're wondering where to start, begin with a simple affirmation. Each morning, stand before a mirror, look into your own eyes, and say, "I am enough." It may feel strange at first, but over time, these words will take root, softening the harsh judgments you hold against yourself. Pair this with acts of care, whether it's taking a walk in nature, indulging in a creative hobby, or simply allowing yourself to rest without guilt. For Asha, this practice was life-changing. She began to see herself not as a sum of her achievements or failures, but as a being worthy of love simply because she existed. She stopped chasing perfection and started embracing progress, no matter how small. Self-love also means forgiving yourself. We often carry the weight of past mistakes, replaying them like broken records. But what if, instead of punishing ourselves, we chose to learn from them? What if we saw our flaws as cracks that let the light in? The Buddha said, "You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Let these words be your guide. What would it look like to treat yourself as kindly as you would a dear friend? As you walk this path, remember that self-love is not a destination but a practice, a daily commitment to honor your worth. And as you cultivate this love within, you'll find it radiates outward, transforming your relationships, your actions, your life. Like Angulimala, you'll discover that redemption, healing, and love begin not with others, but within your own heart. Let this truth take root, and watch as your inner garden blooms. 6. Letting go of resentment liberates you. There was once a wise monk who lived on the outskirts of a small village. His presence brought peace to those who sought his guidance, yet he carried a secret, a story of pain that had shaped his journey. Years ago, as a young man, he had been betrayed by his closest friend, someone he trusted deeply. The betrayal cost him not only his livelihood but also his reputation. For months, the monk clung to his resentment, replaying the event in his mind, each thought fueling his anger and sorrow. One day, as he sat in meditation, he realized that the weight he carried was not his friend's betrayal, but his own refusal to let it go. The Buddha's words echoed in his mind. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. In that moment, he understood that forgiveness was not for the betrayer, it was for himself. Resentment is like a shadow that clings to us, darkening our days and tainting our relationships. It arises from the illusion of control, the belief that by holding on to our pain, we can change the past. Yet, as the Buddha taught in the Four Noble Truths, suffering dukkha stems from attachment to desires, to outcomes, and to the stories we tell ourselves. Forgiveness, then, is the act of releasing this attachment. It is a liberation, not a concession. Consider the story of Prince Ajatashatru, who, driven by ambition and manipulation, betrayed his father, King Bimbisara, and seized the throne. Consumed by guilt and haunted by his actions, Ajatashatru sought the Buddha's counsel. The Buddha, with infinite compassion, did not condemn him but guided him toward understanding the consequences of his actions, karma, and the path to redemption. Through this teaching, Ajatashatru began to forgive himself, recognizing that clinging to guilt would only perpetuate his suffering. In our own lives, forgiveness often feels impossible. We tell ourselves that the other person doesn't deserve it or that letting go would mean condoning their actions. But forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about freeing ourselves from the prison of resentment. As the monk discovered, forgiveness is a gift we give to ourselves, a way to reclaim our peace. To begin this process, try a simple forgiveness meditation. Close your eyes and bring to mind the person or situation that has caused you pain. Notice the emotions that arise: anger, sadness, perhaps even hatred. Now, imagine these feelings as a heavy stone in your hands. Feel its weight, its rough edges. With each breath, allow the stone to grow lighter until, finally, you let it go, watching it sink into a vast, calm ocean. Repeat the words silently: I release this pain. I choose peace. This practice, done regularly, can soften the grip of resentment and open the door to healing. As you reflect on this, ask yourself, what burdens am I carrying that no longer serve me? The answer may not come immediately, but even the act of asking begins the process of release. Letting go of resentment is not a single moment but a journey, one step at a time toward freedom. 7. Detachment brings clarity. Imagine holding a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers, until all that remains is the impression of what you tried to keep. Life is much the same. The more we cling to people, possessions, outcomes, the more we find ourselves trapped by the fear of losing them. Detachment, as the Buddha taught, is not about giving up everything but about freeing ourselves from the grip of attachment. A young woman named Mira once shared her story. She had spent years striving for the perfect life, a high-paying job, a beautiful home, the admiration of her peers. Yet, despite achieving all she had dreamed of, she felt a lingering emptiness. Her happiness was tied to fragile things: the opinions of others, the fleeting thrill of success, the constant need to achieve more. One day, while scrolling through an article on minimalism, she stumbled upon the concept of detachment. It wasn't about renouncing her life, but about reassessing what truly mattered. Detachment is not indifference. It is clarity. It allows us to engage with the world fully while recognizing that our worth is not tied to what we own or what others think of us. This wisdom aligns with the Four Noble Truths, which teach that craving, tanha, is the root of suffering. By letting go of our clinging, we open ourselves to a deeper, more enduring peace. In modern times, the minimalist movement echoes these ancient teachings. People are choosing to live with less, not as a deprivation but as a liberation. By releasing what doesn't serve them, they create space for what truly matters. Mira began her own journey of detachment by decluttering not just her home but her mind. She let go of relationships that drained her, beliefs that limited her, and the constant need for validation. What she discovered was a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. You can begin this process too with a simple journaling exercise. At the end of each day, take a moment to reflect. Write down the things you felt most attached to, whether it's a worry about the future, a material possession, or a desire for recognition. Then, ask yourself, does this serve my peace? If the answer is no, visualize yourself gently placing it aside, like setting down a heavy bag after a long journey. In Buddhist philosophy, the Eightfold Path offers practical guidance for cultivating detachment. The practices of right view and right effort remind us to focus on what aligns with our values rather than chasing transient pleasures. This doesn't mean avoiding joy but recognizing that true happiness arises from within, not from external circumstances. As you navigate this path, remember that detachment is not about letting go of love or ambition. It is about approaching life with open hands, ready to embrace what comes and release what goes. Like a bird soaring through the sky, unburdened by the weight of the earth, you too can find freedom in letting go. Take a moment now to reflect. What am I holding onto too tightly? Let this question guide you, not as a demand but as an invitation. In the stillness of detachment, you may find not only clarity but also the courage to live with greater intention and joy. 8. Growth requires discomfort. In a quiet village, there lived a young blacksmith named Arun. His father had been a master craftsman, known for forging the finest swords in the kingdom. Arun, however, was new to the trade and struggled to match his father's skill. Every day, he burned his hands on the hot iron, struggled to mold the metal, and felt the sting of failure with every misshapen blade. One day, frustrated and overwhelmed, Arun sat by the river and cried. He thought to himself, why must growth be so painful? As he sat there, an elderly monk approached and listened patiently to Arun's story. With a kind smile, the monk said, "Do you know how a lotus blooms? It pushes through mud and murky water, facing resistance at every turn. But without that struggle, it would never rise above the surface to bask in the sun." The monk's words stayed with Arun. He returned to his forge, accepting that discomfort was not his enemy but his teacher. Over time, his hands grew steadier, his strength increased, and his blades became sharper and more beautiful than even his father's. Arun learned that the pain of growth is not a punishment. It is the fire that tempers the steel of our character. Buddhism teaches us that life is a cycle of samsara, a continuous journey through birth, death, and rebirth. Within this cycle, suffering, dukkha, is inevitable. Yet, it is through facing and understanding this suffering that we find the path to liberation. Growth and discomfort are intertwined, much like the lotus and the mud. Without the struggle, there can be no transformation. Modern psychology supports this ancient wisdom. The concept of the comfort zone explains why growth feels so challenging. Within our comfort zones, we feel safe and secure, but we stagnate. Stepping outside, into the unknown, triggers fear and discomfort, but it is also where learning and growth occur. This process, often called deliberate practice, involves pushing beyond our limits in small, manageable ways. You too can embrace this path. Begin with a daily challenge system to gradually expand your comfort zone. Start with small steps. Speak up in a meeting if you're shy, try a new hobby you've always feared you wouldn't be good at, or take a cold shower to build resilience. Each act of discomfort becomes a brick in the foundation of your growth. As you navigate these challenges, remember the Buddha's teaching of the middle way, a path of moderation between indulgence and self-denial. Growth does not require recklessness but mindful effort. Reflect on your journey and ask, what is the smallest step I can take today toward the person I wish to become? Each step, no matter how small, is progress. Discomfort will always accompany growth, but it is not a sign of failure. It is a signal that you are on the path to becoming. Like Arun, who transformed his struggles into mastery, you too can rise above the challenges and find strength you never knew you had. Trust the process, for within the mud of discomfort lies the seed of your blooming. 9. Choose yourself without guilt. In the bustling city of Delhi, a woman named Priya spent her days tending to the needs of others. At work, she took on extra tasks to avoid letting her colleagues down. At home, she juggled the demands of her family, often sacrificing her own needs. Priya's life revolved around making others happy, but deep inside, she felt a growing void. One evening, as she collapsed onto her bed, exhausted and on the verge of tears, she asked herself, when was the last time I chose myself? Choosing yourself can feel selfish in a world that celebrates selflessness, but the truth is, self-neglect serves no one. Buddhism teaches us the importance of right effort, directing our energy toward what nourishes our well-being and growth. When we constantly give to others without replenishing ourselves, we burn out, leaving nothing left to give. True compassion begins with self-compassion. Priya's journey to reclaim her life began with small acts of self-prioritization. She started saying no to tasks that drained her energy and yes to moments of rest and joy. At first, guilt shadowed her every step. She worried about disappointing others, but over time, she realized that those who truly cared for her respected her boundaries. People-pleasing often stems from a deep-rooted fear of rejection, the belief that our worth is tied to how much we can do for others. But this mindset only traps us in cycles of exhaustion and resentment. To break free, we must challenge these beliefs and affirm our inherent worth. Start with this affirmation: I choose myself, and that is enough. Repeat it each morning, letting the words sink into your heart. Pair this with actionable changes. Practice saying no to one small thing each day, whether it's an unnecessary favor or an invitation you'd rather decline. These acts, though simple, reinforce the belief that your time and energy are valuable. Choosing yourself is not about isolating yourself from others, but about creating space for your own needs and dreams. Priya discovered this as she began pursuing a passion she had long ignored: painting. Each stroke of the brush became an act of self-love, a reminder that her happiness mattered. As you reflect on Priya's story, ask yourself, what would it look like to choose myself today? The answer might be as simple as taking a walk, reading a book, or saying no without apology. Whatever it is, know that prioritizing your well-being is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of courage and love. The Buddha's teachings remind us that we are all interconnected. By choosing yourself, you do not diminish others, you inspire them to do the same. As you honor your needs, you radiate a strength and authenticity that uplifts those around you. So take that first step. Choose yourself, not with guilt but with gratitude, knowing that your well-being is the foundation of a life lived fully and freely. 10. Solitude attracts the right people. There was a young woman named Anika who had spent most of her life chasing connection. She believed that her worth was tied to how many people surrounded her, how often her phone buzzed with messages, and how much validation she could gather from the world outside. But despite the noise of her social life, Anika felt an aching emptiness. Her friendships felt shallow, her conversations fleeting, and her heart was restless, searching for something deeper. One day, after a particularly draining interaction with a group of friends who seemed more interested in gossip than genuine connection, Anika retreated to a quiet park near her home. She sat on a weathered bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree and simply listened to the rustle of the leaves, the distant chirp of birds, the faint hum of life around her. In that stillness, something shifted. She realized she had been running from herself, filling every moment with others' voices because she feared the silence of her own. Buddhism teaches that solitude is not a void but a sanctuary, a space where the noise of the world fades, allowing us to hear the quiet truths within. When we embrace solitude, we strengthen our connection with ourselves, which in turn transforms the energy we bring to our relationships. The Buddha once said, "It is better to travel alone than with a fool." This doesn't mean we should reject companionship, but that we should prioritize the quality of our connections over their quantity. Anika decided to embrace this philosophy. She began spending time alone, not out of loneliness but out of curiosity and a desire to nurture herself. She picked up painting, an old hobby she had abandoned, and found joy in the way colors blended on the canvas. She started journaling her thoughts, discovering layers of her emotions she had never explored. At first, it was uncomfortable. There were moments when the silence felt heavy, when her inner critic grew loud. But over time, the stillness became a source of strength. When we thrive in solitude, our energy changes. We no longer seek validation from others because we've found it within ourselves. This shift is palpable. It radiates as confidence, authenticity, and peace. Psychology supports this idea. When individuals feel secure in their own company, they exude a calm self-assurance that naturally draws others toward them. This energy, free from desperation or neediness, acts like a magnet, attracting those who align with our true selves. Anika began to notice this change in her own life. The friends who thrived on drama and superficiality began to drift away, while new connections formed. People who shared her love for art, who engaged in meaningful conversations, who respected her boundaries and celebrated her growth. These relationships felt different. They were grounded in mutual respect and shared values, not in a fear of being alone. If you find yourself longing for deeper connections, start by turning inward. Solitude is not about isolating yourself, but about creating space to rediscover who you are. Begin with small steps. Dedicate an hour each week to an activity you enjoy doing alone, whether it's reading, walking in nature, or exploring a creative passion. Notice how these moments make you feel and allow them to strengthen your sense of self. One practical exercise is to create a solitude map. Divide a sheet of paper into 4 quadrants labeled mind, body, heart, and spirit. In each section, list activities you can do alone to nourish that part of yourself. For example, under mind, you might write, read a book; under body, practice yoga; under heart, journal my emotions; and under spirit, meditate in silence. Use this map as a guide, a reminder that solitude is not about doing nothing. It is about doing what feeds your soul. As you grow comfortable in your own company, observe how your relationships evolve. You may notice that some connections fall away, and that's okay. In their place, you'll find relationships that are richer, deeper, and more aligned with who you've become. Like Anika, you'll discover that thriving in solitude doesn't mean walking alone. It means walking with those who value and uplift your journey. Take a moment to reflect. What would it feel like to be your own sanctuary? Let this question guide you as you embrace the quiet, knowing that the relationships meant for you will naturally find their way into your life. Solitude is not a retreat from the world. It is a return to yourself, a place where you cultivate the light that will illuminate your path and draw the right people to walk beside you. As we come to the end of this journey together, let's pause and reflect on everything we've explored. We've walked through the muddy waters of toxic relationships and seen the strength it takes to rise above them. Like the lotus that blooms untouched by the murk below, we've stepped into the sanctuary of solitude, not as a place of fear, but as a space of empowerment, where our truest selves are waiting to be discovered. We've set boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as sacred lines that protect our energy and honor our self-worth. And we've learned that happiness isn't something we chase in the outside world. It's something we nurture within, like a calm lake at dawn. But perhaps the most profound lesson of all is this: letting go. Letting go of resentment, of attachments, of the need for constant validation. It's not an act of loss. It's an act of liberation. When you release the weight you've been carrying, you free yourself to embrace the present moment fully and joyfully. Let me leave you with a story. There was once a monk who carried a heavy sack of stones on his back wherever he went. When asked why, he replied, "These stones are my burdens, my regrets, my anger, my fear. If I carry them, I won't forget them." One day, he met a wise teacher who asked him, "What if you let go of the sack? Would you forget the lessons? Or would you finally be free to live them?" The monk hesitated but eventually put down the sack. And for the first time in years, he stood tall, breathed deeply, and walked forward with ease. Dear friends, what are the stones you're carrying? What would it feel like to let them go? As you reflect on this, remember that the journey to inner peace and happiness is ongoing. There will be days when you feel like the weight of the world is too much, and that's okay. Growth isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up for yourself, one moment at a time. Now, I have a question for you. What is one thing you can let go of today to feel lighter tomorrow? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories and insights. And if this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, and share this video so we can spread this light to others who might need it. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey today. May you find peace in your solitude, strength in your stillness, and joy in the beautiful, boundless world within you. Until next time, take care and remember, your happiness begins with you.